Alright guys, so we are back for part two. I went ahead and got the transmission bolted onto the engine. Not all the way, I just got some bolts started. You just got to wiggle it on there. It takes a little effort, but it's not that hard. You just got to get it all lined up. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to get this thing up in the air, because I already got some of the bolts just a little bit snug. We're going to get it up in the air and get the rest of the bolts on there. You got the bolts back here. There's a couple on the bottom. And then we're going to put the transfer case back on, bolt it in real good, put that bracket back on for the CV shaft, and then we'll put the torque converter bolts on and the catalytic converter, put all this back on the starter, and then we'll be ready to set this thing back in here. Let me get some things set up and I'll be right back. Alright guys, so the first thing we're going to do is get all these bolts back in. I got most of them in, but I don't got the ones in the bottom. So I'm going to spin this thing around a little bit and get these bolts in. Alright, now we're just going to snug them down and then we'll torque them to spec. There's that. So now what we're going to do is we're going to torque them to spec. My torque wrench is right here. It's the older style. It's a click type, but it works perfectly, so I don't see no need to upgrade. You just set it to the adjustments right here, whatever you want. I got it at 55. Now if I use an extension, you have to compensate for that. I'm not sure the exact specs, but usually if I'm using a short extension, I'll just add 5 or 6 foot-pounds, and that usually does the trick. So, but we want to torque these bolts. They are, I looked it up online, it's 55 foot-pounds. So I'm going to go ahead and torque all these. Get this 18 millimeter, and that's all the bolts. Alright, that is all those bolts torqued to spec. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start on the, we're going to start on the torque converter bolts. So I'm going to get this camera set up in another position and I'll be right back. So now we're going to do the torque converter bolts, and these can be reused, so I'm just going to put some Loctite on them and reuse them. So just like how we got them out, we're going to put them back in. You just line the torque converter up. You can usually get your hand in there and spin the torque converter around. You line one of your holes up right here for the torque converter on the flywheel. It's kind of hard to see in there, but you line that bolt up, or line that hole up, and then line the torque converter up and get one started. Now when you get these going, you don't want to completely tighten one all the way yet, because if you do, it will usually cause you not to be able to get the other one started. So what you want to do is just get them all decently snug, not all the way, just enough to where you still got some movement, but you don't want them too far out either, because they can cause the flywheel not to move because the bolt gets stuck on it. So just get them in there enough to where you still got a little wiggle room, but they're not in the way either. And then once you get them all in there and snug, then you can tighten them down. And the after this, the starter will go on. We'll bolt the starter back in. It's right here. And we'll put this knock sensor back on. Then we'll throw this catalytic converter on and tighten all of it down. And then we'll go around and do the transfer case. Guys, so all I do is take a spot of Loctite, and when I say a spot, just, you don't need a whole lot unless you want to torture the next guy that works on this. I use red. I know it might be overdoing it a little bit, but I've never had a problem with it, and it comes off pretty easy. You want to try to get the threads cleaned up on the bolt as much as you can, because it won't work well if the threads aren't cleaned out. So I just drop me a little dab like that and get it put on there. Alright guys, I got them all in there. Now I'm going to get my torque wrench back out. And these torque converter bolts are 44 foot-pounds. And we're going to have to use a small extension, so I'm just going to put it right at 50, and that should be just fine. Alright, torque converter bolts are tight. Now we're going to go ahead and throw this starter back on. Starter bolts are over here. Let me put this Loctite up. I don't usually use Loctite on a lot, just bolts like that, torque converter bolts that take on a lot of torque and vibration. Alright guys, I apologize, that last part of the video had no audio for some reason. I'm going to have to invest in a new microphone probably. But all I did here, I got those torque converter bolts on. They were, I believe they were 47 foot-pounds. And then I bolted the starter on, right back in here behind this catalytic converter. And those were 37 foot-pounds. And I put the knock sensor back on. And then I put this catalytic converter on. It's got the bracket bolt right down right here, and then it's got 3 nuts up here. Those all get torqued to 37 foot-pounds, and then I put this cover on, and I said it in the video but you didn't hear it obviously, but these bolts are really tiny, so just use some common sense, which is lacking in this society when you're tightening something like that. Just use some sense. Don't be dumb and don't over tighten it. Just get it snug. It's just a little tiny piece of metal. So now that I got all that on, I'm going to get this transfer case on. And I already noticed one thing, you want to check this O-ring. Mine is all tore to pieces, so I'm going to have to get a new O-ring for the transfer case here. But the transfer case will just slide back on this transmission. We'll want to pull this red plug out. That's just something from a junkyard or wherever this came from. And we'll pull that out and we'll slide the transfer case in there. Might spray a little silicone around that edge there so the O-ring doesn't get tore up. And then it's got, I believe it's 6 bolts. And we'll get all that put on, and we'll get this bracket put back on that's right here. And get everything going. So let me get my camera set up. Alright guys, so I got that O-ring replaced on the transfer case. So we're going to pop this little plug out, and we're going to get this transfer case put on in here. Like I said, I got this dry silicone spray. It's actually called garage door lube, but it's basically the same thing. It's dry silicone. And I'm just going to spray a little bit of it in it. You can use WD-40, whatever, just something to lube up this surface so it doesn't mess up the O-ring. And we're going to get this thing set in here. All right, now we're going to get the bolts started. All right, got all those bolts tight. There was 5 of them. So now we're gonna torque these things to spec. And the torque specs for these are 55 foot-pounds. And I don't think we'll have to use any kind of extensions. So we should be good to go there. Let me just get my torque wrench set up. All right, we got those bolts torqued. Now we're going to throw this bracket on. Let me actually flip this camera around. I'll show you a little bit more on this bracket. So this bracket is going to sit on here just like so. Actually, it might be flipped around. No, definitely not flipped around. I had it right way all along. So it sits just like that, and the bolts go in these holes here, and then we'll get it all tightened up and get it torqued down. All right, so let's get this thing on here. I think this is the last step before putting it back in the car. So I'm gonna go ahead and get these 3 13mm bolts started. All right, so I got those on there, and I'm pretty sure I found the right torque specs. You may want to check some more on all data. The best I could find was the 1 13mm bolt right here is 16 foot-pounds, and we're gonna have to use an extension, so I'm gonna probably set it to about 20. And then these, the bigger 15mm, are 46 foot-pounds, so I'm gonna set it to about 50 because I'm gonna have to use an extension on most of those too. So just remember, try to get everything torqued down to spec as good as possible. All right, guys, I got all those torqued. There is nothing else to do in here. So I'm going to get some things cleaned up, and we are going to get ready to set this thing back in the car. Lied, there's one more thing. This bracket, you just put it on and put those 2 nuts on there. I couldn't find a torque spec for those, so just get them decently snug and you should be good to go. The bracket goes right up in here at the bottom. It's for the exhaust. Alright guys, so I got the car pulled back in. Now we're going to set this motor in. Everything's good here. You want to just make sure you got everything out of the way, your shifter cables. There's not a whole lot of wiring harnesses because for the most part they're all on the engine and the transmission. So we're just going to set this thing in here. It just takes some effort to get it in here. You just got to get the angle right, and you got to get the exhaust on the back here to come up over this little hump here. But once you get it up over that hump, it'll pretty much line itself up, and then you set it down on them mounts and we'll start going to town on it. So just be careful guys when you're setting it in. Just take your time. Don't set it down on anything that's going to break, like this power steering cooler or just anything. And one quick thing too, if you washed your car off, you got all the grease off like I did, make sure you got all the water out of those connectors if you got any. You want to try not to get any in there, but if you do, you definitely want to get some air on them or something, or let them dry out and make sure there's no water in them because you don't want nothing shorting out in the main computer, frying everything. So we are going to get this thing set in here and get rolling. Alright guys, let's get this thing going. Engine hoist over that way. Hopefully it's not too much in y'all's way, so I can slide this jack under this transmission Just find you a good spot on the transmission that's not going to damage anything. I got a rubber protector on mine, so on my jack, so it shouldn't hurt anything. But if you need to get like a rubber block or a wood block or something to help you out, then do that. One quick thing too, guys, if you got a second set of hands for this, it'd make it a lot easier to kind of move that jack while you're moving this jack and so on and so forth. So if you got a second pair of hands, it never hurts to have some extra help. So use them if you got them. Alright guys, I got both those mounts set up and set in, so now I'm going to get the nuts on those and we'll start getting the transmission mount on. I like to get it all lined up and then I'll get this thing up in the air and get underneath and start doing the exhaust and the drive shaft and everything underneath, and then we'll finish up top. So I'm going to throw these nuts on this mount. One right here. And the other one's right here. I'm gonna have to get it up in the air to get this one on. So let me get this thing all set up and I'll be right back. Alright guys, so we are gonna get this transmission mount lined up first, and then we're gonna go ahead and put all this back together on this side and everything on the other side. So what we'll do is we'll get this transmission up in the air a little bit with the jack, and it has the 3 18mm bolts. Now this one right here is the longest one. You'll have two the same size and one a little bit longer, and this is the longer one here. Then you'll have a bolt here and a bolt here. Then you get that on and then you jack it up, and you'll have to jack it up to get it on, obviously. Then you jack it up a little bit more and you slide this mount under here. It's a little tricky to get it pried up in there. And then we will get that set down in there, get all this tightened, get all this stuff, and we'll move to the other side. Guys, I hope you can see me there. I trying a couple different angles to help you see these things a little bit better. I grab my chair and this mount, and we'll get a jack on this thing. Alright guys, so got everything we need now. We're going to get these tight. Alright, those 3 bolts are tight. We're going to go ahead and torque them. I got a bunch of different ranges of torque specs for these bolts, between 45 and 60, so I'm just going to go right in the middle and go to 55. And that should be good enough. Alright guys, there's the torque. Now I'm gonna grab this transmission mount and we're gonna get it set in here. Like I said, it's a little bit tricky, but we'll get it put in there. I'm gonna grab my pry bar. Alright, got that set in. Now we just ease that down. Now we can go ahead and let this jack all the way down and get it out of our way. The exhaust stuck in it. There's that. We can get this out of our way. We're going to go ahead and put these nuts back on. And these get torqued to, I want to say it was like 47 foot-pounds, but you can't really get to these with a torque wrench. So we're just going to get them good and snug, as I like to call it. Alright guys, I got those tight. Now we're going to start putting all this back on. CV axle, caliper, tie rod. We're going to take these back loose, of course, all this stuff to get it out of the way so we can get the CV axle in. And we're going to start putting this side back together. Alright guys, so we're going to take all this back loose so we can get that CV axle in there. Got all that loose. We're going to get this little plug out. Alright, so we're going to grab our CV axle. And what you want to do is you want to make sure when this goes in here, of course you want to make sure it splines in the right way. You don't want to spline it the wrong way and strip it. It'll go pretty much anyway. It doesn't matter. Just make sure you get it lined up in those splines. And then you want to make sure it clicks. You'll feel kind of a click, and then once you get it locked in there, kind of pull back on it and make sure it's locked in. And there we go. We'll start putting this all back together. And now we're gonna torque everything to spec. Let me look at my sheet over here and I'll tell you the specs right quick. So the caliper bolts are 47 foot-pounds. The CV axle nut right here is 173 foot-pounds. I'm gonna have to break out my 1/2 one for that one. And the tie rod is, it's not on this sheet. I'll have to look that up for you right quick. And the steering knuckle bolts right here, you want to get those. You'll want to tap these in with a hammer as much as you can, because you want to make sure those seat all the way. And then you tighten them, and you want to tighten these nuts to 144 foot-pounds. And let me look up the torque specs for the tie rod end, and I'll let you know. Alright, so the torque specs for the tie rod ends are a little confusing. It ranged in a lot of different variables. I couldn't find an exact spec, but what I did find was the final torque is 60 foot-pounds, and what you want to start off with is you want to get the tie rod, the taper seated, so you torque it to 35 foot-pounds, and then you turn it. It's probably another quarter turn, and that should get you to 60 foot-pounds on your torque wrench. So we'll tighten that to 60, and then the other torque specs, like I said, I believe 47 for the calipers and 100 and something. I said the torque specs in the previous video. So let's get all these torqued to spec, and we will be done with this side. Alright guys, we got all those torqued. We are done other than torquing this once we set it on the ground. So I'm going to go ahead and put the wheel on this side because we shouldn't have to have it off for anything else. So let me get this wheel back on and we'll go to the other side. Alright guys, so now I'm going up under the car. We are going to reattach the exhaust. Put these bolts back on there and hook that up to the cat. And we're going to also put the drive shaft back on. It's just some, I think it's 8mm bolts. And we're going to get everything bolted up and we're going to torque it to spec. That is all I got to do down here other than hook the oxygen sensor up to. And we will be back up top and putting the rest of the stuff on and finishing this thing up. So let me get this set up. Alright guys, once again down here, I'm not sure how good you're going to be able to see me, but it's the attempt that counts. So let's get all this hooked up. Guys, these are just like the torque converter bolts. I always like to get both pipes hooked up first and then tighten them up. That way that way you still have some play to get each one lined up, because if you get one too tight, the other side might not line up, and you have to loosen these back over. So just get them on there loosely, and then you can tighten them up once you get them connected. Now that we got those exhaust bolts tight, we're going to torque them down. Obviously these aren't the original bolts, so the torque specs are going to be probably a little different, but not much. We're just going to torque them down to about 40 foot-pounds. And that's about what the spec was for them. So don't forget to plug the oxygen sensors back in, guys. We're just going to shove this front one up here because the connector's up there somewhere, but I don't see it. Hopefully plug this back one in. You won't be able to get to it otherwise. Alright, got that hooked up now. We're going to put this drive shaft back in. Pretty simple, you just line it up to the holes and get these bolts started and tighten them all. May have to rotate the transfer. Alright, those are tightened, guys. And these are the same torque as the exhaust, 40 foot-pounds. Alright guys, I got those bolts torqued. That is everything down here. So I'm going to let the car down and we're going to start working on the front. Alright guys, I lied about saying I'm going to let the car down. I'm actually going to keep it up as long as possible. Makes it a little bit easier on the back to have it right at this angle. But anyway, we're going to start hooking everything up top here. Of course, the intake will go on after we get pretty much everything connected. We'll save that for just about last. We want to tighten this motor mount down. This motor mount gets tightened to 55 foot-pounds, I think. Hold on, nope, I lied. 66 foot-pounds. You want to tighten this one too. And then you want to put this motor mount on too, over to here. And it's got the little arm right here that you put in. Right here, you hook that in, and you want to tighten that bolt to, okay, so the one to the engine, this one right here is 66 foot-pounds, and this one is 43 foot-pounds. You got short-term memory. Yeah, 43 foot-pounds. So 66 foot-pounds, 43 foot-pounds, and 66 foot-pounds for that motor mount. And then we're just going to start hooking up all these wires. We'll get this relay box back on. We'll just start plugging everything back in. I'm going to have the video running, but obviously I'm not going to be able to show you every little thing, but just plug all your connectors back in. It should be pretty straightforward. Most of them aren't going to plug in anywhere they shouldn't plug in at. So just plug them in, and we're going to route them back the way they were. That way they don't rub on anything and cut the wires or touch the exhaust or anything like that. We may throw some zip ties back up here where there was some zip ties just to kind of hold it in place. And we'll just start reassembling this engine on the top, and then we'll get to the rest of it, putting this front end back on. So let me get the camera set up. All right guys, so like I said, we're just going to start getting all this put back together. We'll start with this transmission stuff, kind of try to go in reverse the same way we came. Well, actually, I said transmission. We're going to start with this power steering hose. Remember, it goes on the steering rack, and you got to hook that other hose up to it. And then it's a 10-millimeter bolt, and we'll get that tightened down. That's what I'm going to start with. Like I said, I'm going to try to go in just about reverse of the way we took it out. That way everything goes as smoothly as possible. Alright guys, and I couldn't find a spec on this power steering hose, so we're going to go the old-fashioned method, good and tight. Alright, there's that. Now we're going to go ahead and hook this coolant hose up. And we're also these two coolant hoses, and then we'll hook the fuel lines back up and the transmission shifter cable, all that good stuff. And the coolant lines, they just snap back into place with these little plastic clips. I'm not sure how much you can see, but it's pretty straightforward. You just snap them back in until you hear the click, and you won't pull back up on them just to make sure that they don't come back off. So, those are pretty simple. And this is the brake booster hose here. We're gonna just keep that over there. All right, we'll go ahead and put the shifter cable on here. These are two more bolts. Maybe there's torque specs, but I sure can't find them, so good and tight for these. Then you just plug this shifter back in. It just kind of snaps into the shift linkage there. All right. Now we're going to start. Let's just go ahead and hook this fuel line up. Actually, I'm going to wait on the fuel line just for now. We might need to move some things around. So, and I'm going to wait on this AC line too. So we're going to start tracing all these wires back. Like I said, they only go one way, so you'll just keep looking until you figure out where they go. If you have it all lined up right, which I pretty much do, then they'll just pretty much line right up to where they're supposed to go. So I'm going to do that. I guess to get one of these connectors in the back, I had to take this shifter back off. It was a little bit difficult to get my big old arms down there, so. Alright, we're going to go ahead and put this back on. It's the relay box bracket, I guess you would call it. It's got I think it's 3 10mm bolts. Same with these. It's one 10mm bolt and 2 nuts. And obviously I couldn't find any torque specs on these, so just be smart with bolts that are like this, that don't have specs. Just, take into consideration that these are really small bolts, and it does not take a lot of torque to completely break them. And here I go trying to jump ahead of myself. We're going to go ahead and put this engine mount on. It's got two bolts. Slides onto the engine mount, and then you tighten them down. Remember, the one to the engine is 66, and the one to the frame of the car is 43. I just there's little markings. You can see where the bolts went. So I just try to get those lined up as close as possible. Now, if it has an alignment procedure, that's a different story, but this one doesn't. So, at least not that I know of. Get that one to 66 as well. Alright guys, so I just remembered there's one ground wire right here. It's going to be really hard to get to with this box on, so we're just going to wait once again. So I guess now our next step is going to be putting the intake on. Let me get some things set up and we'll get started on it. Alright guys, so here's the intake obviously. So we're going to put this back on. Just remember it's got the 4 really long bolts that you're going to want to take out while you're putting it in, because they're really hard to get out or get in because these bolts get in the way. So just pull these out until you get it put in. And then remember you got, there's a bolt right here for the, whatever that sensor is we put, it's like a little fuel sensor. And then there's also a bolt for the intake back here. Go ahead and take that out so it don't fall out anywhere. And you got one on each corner here. And I think that's all on the intake. There's some connectors and a couple brackets that we'll put on. And there's no vacuum lines back here. There is a port for one here, but it's plugged off, so we don't need that. There's one connector here. And then vacuum hose hooks up right here from the brake booster, I think. So let's get all that connected. Alright guys, so we'll just start plugging away at this intake here. Hope you can see me good enough. It's always when you're setting the intake on here, just constantly try to keep an eye on your gaskets as long as you can. And that way, because if one of these gets cocked sideways, because this one's for some reason a little crooked, it's not wanting to cooperate the way I want it to. But if it gets sideways, I mean, obviously it'll leak. So just keep an eye on it best you can. Alright guys, so I was able to get it set down in there. Just takes a little of this and a little of that to get it in. Like I said, just make sure once you get it set down, your gaskets are perfectly lined up so you don't have no leaks or anything like that. Mine is good to go. Now we're going to get all these bolts tightened. Alright, now we're going to torque them down to spec. These bolts don't take much torque, 17 foot-pounds. So those back bolts are going to be next to impossible to get the correct torque. So I'm just going to have to snug them up as best as I can. But like I said, 17 foot-pounds isn't really that much anyway. Alright, now that I got all those torqued down, I'm going to plug all the connectors in to the intake, and then we'll get started on the airbox. Alright guys, so I got the all the hoses hooked up, the connectors, except for one that I just realized I forgot about. This one right here, your electric throttle. I'll get that hooked up in a second. But now we're going to put the airbox on. It's pretty simple. It had this one bolt here, and then it just pops off from down at the bottom. And it just lines up in here. And then there should be a mass airflow sensor connector somewhere in these connectors. So we'll get that buttoned up right quick. And one quick little pet peeve of mine. If you're gonna, I zip tied these wires on like they were before. And if you're gonna zip tie these things, guys, don't be that guy and not cut the tips off. You see how easy that was? All you need is a pair of snips or a knife. Don't be that guy. All right, guys, now we're gonna start putting this front end on. So it's got this whole piece here. Remember, it's got the 4 15s on each side, and then it's got two 10 millimeters right here, and then just several bolts up top, and then it's got the bumper that goes across as well. So we're going to get that put on, start finishing this thing up. Should be pretty simple to put all this back on. Just take your time, and like I said, if you have any questions, comments, or anything about this car or the other cars in my videos or anything like that, just feel free to comment below in the comment section, and I'll try to answer them as best as I can. And don't forget to like my video, subscribe to my page, and hit that notification button, because I'm going to be having more videos coming into the page pretty often now, so just stay tuned. There'll be more great things ahead. Alright guys, so and when I say guys, I mean guys and gals. That's just how I talk. So I'm not trying to be sexist or anything like that. I love everybody. So that's that. So let's get these bolts in here and get this thing secured. All right, now that we got all that secured, I'm gonna go ahead and put this junction box on. We'll put that bracket on first that I tried to put on 10 times, and then we'll get it all hooked up. And now we're gonna hook up these two positive wires. Get that nice and snug, and you're good to go. And then snap this back on, just a little plastic cover, covered in pollen, because it's pollen season around here. And that is all connected. And I got that ground. Do not forget the ground right here, guys. There's one ground that hooks right here. There's that. All right, now that we got all those wires hooked up, these are our headlight wires. One of them's the horn we can go ahead and plug in. all that hooked up. Now we can start putting all the accessories on the front here. I'm going to go ahead and put the radiator. Let me switch this video over. So now we're going to put the radiator and the condenser unit on and cooling fans. It's pretty straightforward. Just sets in these mounts and bolts in with all these bolts here. So let's get that going. Alright guys, so we're going to slap this radiator in here right quick. These lined up where they need to be. That. Always make sure your rubber bushings are at the bottom of your radiator where it sits in right here. Just get it in those holes, and simple as that. We'll go ahead and throw these upper radiator mounts in too while we're at it. Alright guys, so the front bumper is pretty self-explanatory. It's got the some screws up top, screws on the bottom, a screw right up under here, and then it bolts it, screws into everywhere. It's pretty self-explanatory. There's really nothing complicated about that. Just make sure and don't forget to plug your fog lights back in. Alright guys, so we are going to finish up bolting this thing on the top, the bumper. I got it on the ground so it'll be a little bit easier to work on, maybe a little bit easier for y'all to see. So I'm just going to keep plugging away at it. Alright, so basically all you got to do is find you some little pick or flathead. I'll probably just be able to use this pick right here. And you just pop this little center cap off. And then the CV axle nut will be right there. And we'll get all that back out, and the CV axle gets torqued down to 173 foot-pounds. So let me get everything set up and we'll get that torqued. Alright guys, now all we got to do is I'm going to put these screws in. There's three or four screws that go right here to secure this all in place. And then we are going to start putting some fluids in this thing, hook the battery up, and see what happens. I'm going to go over everything, make sure everything's good, make sure there's no connectors on anywhere that can get cut or burnt with from the exhaust. And I'm just going to look around, just make sure everything's where it needs to be, make sure I didn't forget anything. And then we will start this thing up and see what happens. Guys, so I got everything done. I've already pretty much topped off all the fluids. I like to use this with the when putting the coolant in. It's a little kit that's a funnel. It comes with a bunch of different fittings that'll fit on there, and it helps bleed all the air out of your system. If you're doing it a lot, it's good to have. Make sure and fill up your power steering fluid. You'll probably have to top that back off because once you turn the car on and turn it a few times, it'll bleed out. So I put about 4 quarts in the transmission right now. Obviously, it takes way more than that, but I don't know how much was in it before I got it. I'm assuming it was probably empty, and I think these things take around 10 quarts, but I don't know if there was any left in the torque converter or not. So I am just going to put 4 in and then start it up, and then I'll check it from there. Don't want to overfill it. And obviously check your oil. I didn't change the oil, so should be good as far as that goes. And all that I am lacking now is I'm going to torque these wheels down. I forgot to torque the lug nuts to 140 foot-pounds, so I'm going to torque them down, and then I'm going to hook the battery back up, and we'll check for fuel leaks. The battery's straightforward, like I said in the first video. Just positive here, negative here. Always hook your positive cable up first, and everything should be good there. And then we will get this thing started up and see what happens. Everything is good. So what I also like to do now that we got that done is I like to cycle the key on and off a few times. And then I like to go out here and look around at the intake, make sure there's no fuel leaks anywhere. You can smell a fuel leak, so I don't smell anything. We can check this main line that's right under there. It's kind of hard to see on the camera, but check everything. Make sure you got no leaks, and then we will be starting this thing up. I'm just going to check it out and make sure for sure that there's no leaks. Then we will start it up and see what happens. Alright guys, I got everything put together and I got it all running. I'm letting it warm up, and we're going to go for a test drive. Make sure and check all your fluids once you get it all warmed up. Of course, your oil, you don't check while it's warmed up. You check it cold, but check the power steering fluid. And you may have a little noise on the power steering pump when you first get it going. Just drive it a little bit or turn the wheel back and forth several times, and that will usually take care of the problem. Let this thing warm all the way up, and then we can check the transmission fluid, and we will be ready for a test drive of this thing, and we will see what happens. Alright guys, I got that Acadia done. It shifts great, drives great, everything is perfect on it. I already had to ship it out. I already got other stuff in here right now, so I wasn't able to take a video of driving it, but everything is perfect on it, so it is good to go. If you have any questions, like I said on the video, about anything about the Acadia or anything in general, just feel free to comment in the comment section, and make sure and like the video and subscribe to my page, and also hit that little that bell right below the video that lets you know when I'm getting new videos put on here, so you can get notified, stay up to date. So stay tuned guys, and we will have more videos just as soon as I can get them on here. This coronavirus stuff is kind of hindering me a little bit, but we will press on as much as we can safely. Make sure everybody stays safe out there. Wash your hands, sanitize all the stuff, you know, all the social distancing stuff going on right now. And if you're a praying person, pray for our country, because our country is in a world of trouble right now. So we could use all the prayers we can get, and hopefully we'll be back to normal before you know it. Have a blessed day, everybody, and talk to you later.